The man who lay dying at the foot of the mesa was not supposed to be her concern. In the Arizona Territory of 1875, the line between survival and sentiment was as thin and sharp as a shard of flint. For Elara Vance, a woman alone on a homestead, carved from the unforgiving red earth, a wounded Apache was a death warrant, a trouble she should have ridden away from without a second glance. But in the storm-lashed twilight, she saw not a warrior or a savage, but a human being whose life was draining into the mud. That single dangerous act of compassion, of choosing mercy over fear, would vanish into the past, like a whisper on the wind. She would forget his face, but 5 years later, the entire territory would be reminded of him when he returned with an army of warriors, and the fate of her world would rest on the echo of that forgotten kindness. The sky over the Chiricahua Mountains had been the color of a fresh bruise all afternoon. Elara Vance knew the signs. The air grew heavy, the usual chorus of cicadas fell silent, and the wind, when it came, carried the scent of wet dust and distant ozone. She'd spent the day mending a section of fence on the far side of her property, a lonely patch of 160 acres her father had claimed and died for. Now, with the sun bleeding away behind the serrated peaks, she spurred her weary mare Dusty towards the flickering promise of her lamplit cabin. That's when the storm broke. It wasn't a gentle summer shower, it was a biblical deluge. Rain came down in solid, blinding sheets, turning the arroyos into raging torrents, and the dusty ground into a slick, treacherous clay. Thunder cracked like the sky itself was splitting apart, and lightning illuminated the landscape in stark, terrifying flashes. It was in one of these flashes, a brilliant ghost-white strobe, that she saw him. He was crumpled at the base of a rock outcropping, half submerged in a growing pool of muddy water. From a distance he was just a shape, a discarded bundle of buck skin. But Elara had lived in this land long enough to recognize the form of a man. Her first instinct, born of years of cautionary tales and simmering conflict, was pure cold fear. An Apache. The word itself was a spectre, whispered in hushed tones in the nearby settlement of Wilcox, synonymous with raids, with violence, with the ever-present danger of the frontier. Every settler knew the stories. Every settler knew the rules. You don't stop. You don't help. You ride on. She pulled Dusty to a halt, the mare snorting nervously, her own fear a palpable thing. Elara's hand trembled as it rested on the stock of the Winchester rifle sheathed beside her saddle. She could turn back. No one would ever know. It would be the smart thing to do the safe thing. Her father, a pragmatic man to his core, would have called her a fool for even hesitating. But another flash of lightning lit the scene, and this time she saw the details. The unnatural angle of his leg, the dark stain spreading from his side, a stark contrast to the pale buckskin even through the downpour. He wasn't moving. He was either dead or close to it. The stories they told in town were of warriors, of demons on horseback. This was just a man drowning in the mud, forgotten by the world. A memory surfaced unbidden. Her mother, a gentle woman from Pennsylvania, who never quite hardened to the frontier, tending to Elara's own fever as a child. Kindness costs nothing, Elara, she'd whispered, her cool hand on Elara's brow. But its worth is immeasurable. Her mother had been taken by that same fever 2 years later. Her father by a cattle stampede a year after that. Now at 22, Elara was all that was left of the Vance family, a solitary woman clinging to a piece of land that most people considered cursed. What was one more foolish risk in a life defined by them, with a curse that was half prayer? She dismounted. The mud sucked at her boots as she slogged through the deluge towards the fallen man. Up close, his condition was even worse than she'd imagined. A deep gash crusted with blood and dirt ran along his ribs. It looked like a glancing shot from a rifle, but it was badly infected. His leg was broken, the bone threatening to pierce the skin. His face, though streaked with mud and blood, was strong-featured with high cheekbones and a proud mouth now slack in unconsciousness. He was young, no older than her. His long black hair was matted to his skull, and a single rain-soaked hawk feather was tied into one of the strands. He was dying. She knew it with a certainty that chilled her more than the rain. Leaving him here was a death sentence. Taking him in, that was its own kind of gamble. If anyone from Wilcox found out she was harboring an Apache, she'd be branded a traitor, an outcast. They might even form a mob. Men like Silas Croft, the wealthy rancher who was trying to buy her out, would use it as the perfect excuse to run her off her land for good. She looked at his face again, at the vulnerability of his unconscious form. He was someone's son, someone's brother. He was a human being. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Damn it all," Ilara muttered to the roaring wind. She grabbed him under the arms. He was heavier than he looked, a dead weight of muscle and bone. With a strength born of pure desperation and a life of hard labor, she began to drag him through the mud, back towards her horse, back towards the faint, welcoming light of her cabin. She didn't know his name. She didn't know if he was a friend or a foe. All she knew was that she couldn't let him die alone in the storm. It was a choice that would either save her or destroy her completely. Getting him onto Dusty's back was a Herculean task. The horse, terrified of the storm and the scent of blood, fought her every step of the way. But Ilara was stubborn. Using a fallen log for leverage, she managed to heave the unconscious man over the saddle, tying him down with her lariat, before beginning the slow, agonizing journey back to the cabin. Inside, the small space felt like a sanctuary from the raging world. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn log walls. She laid him on a pallet of blankets, near the warmth, his labored breathing filling the silence between thunderclaps. The next 3 days were a blur of fear, exhaustion, and grim determination. Ilara became a healer, drawing on the knowledge of herbs and remedies her mother had painstakingly taught her. She cleaned the gash on his side with boiled water and whiskey, a precious commodity she rarely touched. The wound was deep and inflamed the skin around it, hot and angry. She ground yarrow and plantain into a poultice to fight the infection and draw out the poison, reapplying it every few hours. His fever raged a furnace that threatened to consume him. He thrashed in his delirium, crying out in a language she didn't understand, words that sounded like jagged rock and flowing water. In those moments, she would speak to him softly, her voice a low murmur, the way she would soothe a spooked horse, hoping the tone, if not the words, could offer some comfort. She set his broken leg as best she could, fashioning a splint from 2 sturdy pieces of pine wood and strips of clean linen. The act was intimate and terrifying. This man, who in any other circumstance would be her mortal enemy, was utterly at her mercy. His life was literally in her hands. Slowly, miraculously, the fever broke. On the 4th day, she awoke from a brief, fitful sleep in her rocking chair to find him watching her. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and wary like a hawk's. There was no gratitude in them, only a deep, penetrating assessment. The silence stretched thick with unspoken questions and a century of animosity. "Water?" she asked, her voice raspy. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She brought it to him in a tin cup, holding it to his lips. He drank greedily, his eyes never leaving hers. Communication began in this way, a language of gestures of necessity. She learned he was in constant pain, but possessed a stoicism that was almost inhuman. He never complained, never groaned. He simply endured. She would point to herself and say, "Elara." He would watch her, his expression unreadable. One evening, as she changed the dressing on his wound, he spoke for the first time. His voice was a low rumble, rough from disuse. Why the single word hung in the air? Elara paused, her hands still. She didn't need to ask what he meant. Why help him? Why risk everything for an enemy? She looked at the fire, gathering her thoughts. "My mother taught me to help those who need it," she said, simply looking back at him. "You needed help." He seemed to consider this, his gaze intense. Then he touched his own chest. Kyle. It was the first time she'd heard his name. Kyle. It suited him. Over the next few weeks, a fragile truce grew into a strange, unspoken friendship. As Kyle healed, he began to talk more his English, broken but functional. He'd learned it from a trader years ago, he explained. He never spoke of how he came to be wounded, or who had left him for dead. It was a part of his life that remained shrouded in shadow. Instead, they spoke of other things. He taught her the Apache names for the hawk that circled her property Isil, and the coyote she heard howling at Nightumbar. She in turn read to him, from the only book she owned besides the Bible, a tattered copy of Shakespeare's sonnets her mother had brought from back east. He seemed fascinated by the rhythm and the alien emotions of the words. A quiet routine settled over the cabin. By day, Elara would do her chores, always aware of the dark eyes watching her from the pallet. By night, they would share a simple meal in near silence, the crackling fire their only companion. She saw glimpses of the man behind the warrior. She saw the way his hands, though calloused and scarred, were surprisingly gentle as he carved a small, intricate figure of a horse from a piece of scrap wood. She saw the ghost of a smile touch his lips when her old cat Patches decided to curl up on his good leg. She found herself admiring his resilience, his quiet dignity. And he in turn seemed to see beyond the frightened settler woman to the core of strength and compassion within her. An undeniable current flowed between them, a connection forged in a crucible of silence and shared vulnerability. It was a dangerous, impossible attraction, and both of them knew it. One morning, nearly a month after she'd found him, she woke to find the pallet by the fire empty. Panic seized her for a moment, before she saw him standing by the open cabin door, leaning heavily on a crude crutch he'd fashioned. He was staring out at the sunrise, painting the mountains in hues of gold and rose. "You are leaving," she stated. It wasn't a question. He turned to face her. He was still gaunt, but the strength was returning to his frame. "My people will think I am dead," he said. "I must go back." A strange sense of loss washed over Elara. The cabin suddenly felt too big, too quiet. "Your leg is not fully healed. It will heal on the journey." He replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. She nodded, accepting it. She packed him a small satchel with what little food she could spare, dried jerky, a small bag of cornmeal, and filled a water skin. She brought it to him at the door. Their fingers brushed as he took it, and a jolt passed between them, as real and potent as a lightning strike. Their eyes met, and in that gaze lay all the things they could never say. He reached up and untied the single hawk feather from his hair. He pressed it into her palm, his fingers closing hers around it. "For the dove who saved the hawk," he said, his voice low. And then he was gone. He limped out into the dawn, not looking back, and was quickly swallowed by the vast, indifferent landscape. Ilara stood in the doorway for a long time, the warmth of his hand still tingling on hers, the small feather a tangible proof that it hadn't all been a dream. She tucked it away in her mother's old jewelry box, a secret memento of the man named Cale. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the memory of him began to fade, softened by the harsh realities of frontier life. She had survived. She had done the right thing. It was over. She had no idea it was only the beginning. The 5 years that followed Kyle's departure were etched onto Ilara's soul as surely as the sun and wind etched lines onto the canyon walls. Life on the frontier was a relentless grind, a constant battle against drought, disease, and loneliness. But a more personal and insidious threat had begun to loom over her homestead, Silas Croft. Croft was a man who consumed land the way a wildfire consumed dry brush. He had come to the territory with money from back east and a bottomless ambition. His sprawling cattle ranch, the Bar C bordered Ilara's property to the north and west, and he made no secret of his desire to own her 160 acres. To him, her small, self-sufficient homestead was an irritating snag in the grand tapestry of his empire. His first offer, made a year after Kyle had left, was delivered by the man himself. Croft rode up to her cabin on a magnificent black stallion, his tailored suit and polished boots a stark contrast to the dusty landscape. He was handsome in a severe way, with cold blue eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. Miss Vance, he'd said, tipping his hat with practiced charm. A woman like you all alone out here. It's a hard life. I am prepared to offer you a fair price for this plot. Enough to set you up comfortably in a town like Tucson, or even to take you back east. This land was my father's, Mr. Croft. Ilara had replied, her hand resting near the axe handle on the woodpile. It's my home. It's not for sale. Croft's smile tightened. Everything has a price, my dear. Think on it. His offers continued, each one more insistent than the last. When she repeatedly refused, his methods changed. The charm evaporated, revealing the predator beneath. He began a campaign of attrition. A section of her fence would be mysteriously cut, allowing her few cattle to wander off. Her well, the lifeblood of the farm, was fouled one night with a dead animal, forcing her to spend days cleaning it. She knew it was Croft's men, but she couldn't prove it. The local law sheriff Brody in Wilcox was a good man, but world-weary and overwhelmed. He had a vast territory to patrol, and Croft was a powerful, influential figure. Be careful, Ilara, Brody had warned her on one of his infrequent patrols. Croft's a snake. He's got friends in high places and men on his payroll who ain't afraid of the dark. I hear talk he's been paying Jedediah Kane for odd jobs. The name sent a chill down her spine. Kane was a hired gun, a man with a reputation for cruelty and a notched pistol. He was Croft's shadow, the physical manifestation of his threats. Kane began making appearances near her property line, a hulking figure who would just sit on his horse and watch her for hours, his gaze unsettling and malevolent. He never spoke, but his presence was a constant nerve-shredding threat. The pressure from Croft, combined with 2 years of poor rainfall, pushed Ilara to her limits. The once lush patch of green around her cabin withered. Her small corn crop failed. The creek bed that bisected her property, which always held at least a trickle of water, ran bone dry for the first time she could remember. The land grew hard and cracked, mirroring the hardness that was growing in her own heart. She became leaner, tougher. The soft edges of her youth were whittled away, replaced by a steely resolve. She learned to sleep with her Winchester, loaded and propped against her bedside table. She learned to read the subtle signs of the land, to predict the movements of Croft's men, to live in a state of constant vigilance. Her isolation deepened. The folks in Wilcox, influenced by Croft's whispers that she was a stubborn, half-crazy spinster, kept their distance. She was an island, and the sea was rising. One sweltering afternoon, she found what looked like survey stakes hammered into the ground near the northern edge of her land, well within her property line. Enraged, she tore them out of the ground. The next day, Jedediah Kane paid her a visit. He didn't bother with pleasantries, riding his horse right up to her porch. He was a large, unkempt man with tobacco-stained teeth and dead eyes. "Mr. Croft asks you to reconsider his latest offer." Kane growled, spitting a stream of brown juice near her boot. "He's a patient man, but his patience is wearing thin. This land is drying up. It's worthless. He's doing you a favor. This land is mine." Kane Elara said, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. "Tell your master it will never be his." Kane chuckled a low, ugly sound. "That's a mistake, girlie." He leaned down from his saddle, his face uncomfortably close. "A real pretty mistake." He rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and a palpable sense of menace in his wake. That night, Elara couldn't sleep. She sat in her rocking chair, the Winchester across her lap, watching the moonlit landscape. Why was Croft so obsessed? Kane was right. The land was becoming worthless due to the drought. It didn't make sense. There had to be something more, a piece of the puzzle she was missing. Driven by a sudden impulse, she retrieved an old, dusty trunk from under her bed. It held her parents' belongings. She sifted through her mother's letters and dried flowers until she found what she was looking for: her father's journals. He had been a meticulous man, a former surveyor who had documented everything. She spent hours poring over the brittle, ink-filled pages, reading his notes about soil composition, weather patterns, and property lines. And then she found it. An entry from his first year on the homestead, accompanied by a hand-drawn map. October 12, 1858. "The drought this year is severe, the worst I've seen. The main creek is but a memory. Yet I have made a remarkable discovery. Tucked away in the small box canyon, at the far western edge of our claim, hidden behind a thicket of ironwood, is a spring. It seems to be fed from a deep aquifer. The water runs cool and clear even now. I shall call it Whispering Creek, for the sound it makes as it emerges from the rock. It is our secret, our insurance against the cruelty of this land." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. A spring, a hidden year-round spring. In a land dying of thirst, that spring wasn't just insurance. It was a treasure beyond measure. It was more valuable than gold. And Silas Croft knew about it. It all clicked into place. His relentless pressure, his obsession with her worthless land. He wasn't after grazing pasture, he was after the water. With control of that spring, his cattle empire would be drought-proof. He could monopolize the water in the region, forcing smaller ranchers to sell to him for pennies on the dollar. Her homestead wasn't a snag in his plan. It was the key to everything. A cold fury replaced her fear. This wasn't just about her home anymore. It was about her father's legacy, about fighting a man who would bleed the entire valley dry for his own greed. She looked out the window at the dark, silent land. She was alone, outgunned, and standing in the way of the most powerful man in the territory. But now she knew why she had to fight, and she would not be moved. The discovery of her father's journal changed everything. It transformed Elara from a weary defender into a determined guardian. Whispering Creek was not just a resource, it was a sacred trust. She now understood the true stakes of her battle with Silas Croft. Armed with this new knowledge, she became even more vigilant. She spent a full day locating the hidden spring, following her father's hand-drawn map. It was exactly where he'd described it, tucked away in a narrow canyon concealed by a dense screen of thorny brush and ancient ironwood trees. The sound was faint at first, a soft murmur, but as she pushed through the foliage, she saw it. A steady, clear stream of water bubbling up from a fissure in the rock, pooling into a small, crystal-clear basin before trickling down into the sandy earth. It was a miracle, an oasis in a dying land. She realized with a jolt of terror how vulnerable it was. If Croft found it, he could dam it, divert it, or simply fence it off and claim it as his own. Her first act was to camouflage the entrance to the canyon, even further dragging fallen branches and dead cacti to make the thicket seem impassable and natural. Croft, however, was done with subtlety. His patience had finally, as Kane predicted, worn thin. The campaign of harassment escalated into open aggression. One morning, she awoke to find the small dam she'd built on the main creek bed to collect rainwater had been dynamited. The precious few hundred gallons she'd saved were gone, soaked into the thirsty ground. A week later, her small flock of chickens was slaughtered, their bodies left scattered in the yard as a gruesome warning. Sheriff Brody rode out his face, a grim mask of frustration. "I know it's Croft Elara, and you know it, but there's no proof, just a dead man's word against a rich man's gold. He owns the judge in Tucson and half the territorial legislature. My hands are tied." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a pained sympathy. "He's trying to break you. Don't let him." But breaking her was exactly the plan. The final assault came on a moonless night in late autumn. Elara was jolted from a light sleep by a frantic whinny from Dusty in the barn. Then she smelled it, the acrid, unmistakable scent of smoke. She grabbed her Winchester and burst out of the cabin. The sight that greeted her stole the air from her lungs. Her barn, the structure her father had built with his own 2 hands, was engulfed in flames. The fire roared into the night sky, a ravenous orange beast devouring years of hard work and memory. Dusty was trapped inside, kicking and screaming in terror. Without a second thought, Elara ran towards the inferno. The heat was a physical blow searing her skin. She yanked at the heavy barn door, the wood hot to the touch. It was jammed. From the corner of her eye, she saw 2 figures on horseback, silhouetted against the flames, before they spurred their horses and disappeared into the darkness. Kane and another of Croft's men. Panic gave way to a white-hot rage. "Dusty!" she screamed. Using the stock of her rifle, she smashed at the wooden bar holding the door shut. The wood splintered, groaned, and finally gave way. A wall of smoke and heat billowed out, choking her. Through the swirling embers, she saw Dusty's terrified eyes. Covering her mouth and nose with her sleeve, she plunged in, grabbed the mare's halter, and pulled with all her might. The horse, mad with fear, resisted for a moment, then bolted, dragging Elara out of the collapsing structure, just as the main roof beam crashed down in a shower of sparks. She stood there, gasping for breath, her face smeared with soot, tears carving clean tracks through the grime. She had saved her horse, but the barn was a total loss. Her winter hay, her tools, the small carriage her father had built, all gone. It was a devastating blow, designed to cripple her, to leave her with nothing for the coming winter. The next morning, as the sun rose on the smouldering, blackened ruins, Silas Croft paid her a final visit. He didn't bother to dismount, looking down at her from his polished saddle with an expression of feigned pity. "A terrible tragedy, Miss Vance," he said, his voice dripping with insincerity. "Fires are so common in the dry season. A stray spark, a bit of lightning." Elara stared at him, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it felt like it could set him alight. "Get off my land, Croft." His mask of sympathy dropped. "You have nothing left." He sneered. "You're beaten. I'm making you my final offer. $500. For the land, the deed, everything. You take it and you're gone by sunset, or my next visit won't be so impersonal. Jedediah has been itching for a reason to come inside that little cabin of yours. The threat was vile, unmistakable. He wasn't just going to take her land. He was going to destroy her. She looked at the ruins of her barn, at the parched earth around her, at the powerful, arrogant man who had orchestrated it all. Despair washed over her a cold, heavy tide. He was right. She had nothing left to fight with. Her savings were gone, her spirit was battered, and the law was powerless to help her. She was utterly and completely alone. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by a hollow emptiness. Maybe it was time to give up. Maybe this land was truly cursed. As Croft watched a triumphant smirk playing on his lips, Ilara's gaze drifted to the distant ridgeline, the sun rising behind it. She was just about to open her mouth to utter the words of surrender that felt like ash on her tongue when she saw them. At first, it was just a flicker of movement against the dawn sky. A single rider. Then another and another. They appeared as if from the earth itself, lining the crest of the ridge. Not 2 or 3, but dozens. A formidable line of riders sitting silent and motionless on their horses, their forms stark silhouettes against the brilliant morning sun. They were too far to make out details, but their posture, the lances some of them held the way they sat their ponies, with an effortless grace, there was no mistaking who they were. Apache. An army of them. Croft saw them too. His smirk vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief, then alarm. His horse shifted nervously beneath him. Ilara's heart, which had been a leaden weight in her chest, began to pound with a terrifying, bewildering mixture of hope and dread. Settlers didn't see war parties of this size unless a major raid was imminent. They were looking directly at her homestead. Then one rider detached himself from the group, urging his horse forward. He began to descend the long slope towards her cabin. Even at a distance, there was something familiar in his bearing, in the confident, fluid way he moved with his horse. As he drew closer, the morning light caught the details of his face, a face she had seen only in fevered dreams and fleeting memories for 5 long years. It was Kyle. He was no longer the broken, half-dead man she had dragged from the mud. He sat astride a magnificent paint warhorse, his body lean and powerful. His face was harder marked by time and authority, but his eyes were the same as keen and piercing as a hawk's. He wore the garb of a war chief, and at his side was not a rifle, but the respect and obedience of every warrior on that ridge. He reined his horse to a stop a few yards from her. His gaze sweeping over the scene, the smouldering ruins of the barn, her soot-stained face, and the stunned, fearful Silas Croft. His eyes finally settled on Ilara, and in their dark depths she saw a flicker of recognition, and something else, a debt about to be repaid. The arrival of Cale and his warriors shattered the morning's grim reality, replacing it with a tension so thick it felt like the air before a lightning strike. Silas Croft, a man accustomed to being the most powerful force in any room, now found himself dwarfed by the silent army arrayed on the ridge. His face, normally ruddy with confidence, had paled to a sickly white. The hand holding his reins trembled. Ilara stood frozen, her mind struggling to process the impossible scene. The man before her was the same one she had nursed back from the brink of death, yet he was utterly transformed. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by an aura of command that was as natural to him as breathing. He was a leader, a chief. Kyle's gaze lingered on Ilara for a moment longer before shifting to Croft. He didn't speak, but his eyes narrowed with a cold, analytical fire, taking in the wealthy rancher's expensive attire and the fear radiating from him. Croft, recovering a fraction of his bravado, found his voice. It was strained, high-pitched. "What is the meaning of this? This is private land. You and your people are trespassing." Kyle's lips twisted in a humorless smile. "This land was Apache, long before your fences," he said, his English, now fluent and clear, honed by the years. He gestured with his chin towards the ruins of the barn. "You burn her home." It was not a question, but a statement of fact. That was a tragic accident. Croft blustered, his eyes darting between Cale and the warriors on the hill. "I was just here offering Miss Vance my condolences. And my assistance." "Your assistance?" Ilara's voice, raw with grief and anger, cut through the air. "You call threats and arson assistance?" She took a step forward, placing herself slightly between Kyle and Croft. A strange protective instinct flared within her. She didn't know Kyle's intentions, whether he was a savior or a new, more dangerous threat. But at that moment, the only enemy she saw was Silas Croft. "He did this," she said, her voice ringing with conviction as she looked directly at Cale. "He's been trying to drive me off this land for years. Last night, his man, Jedediah Kane, set fire to my barn." Cale's expression didn't change, but a dangerous light flickered in his eyes. He dismounted, in a single fluid motion, landing silently on the hard-packed earth. He was taller than she remembered his presence, more imposing. He walked towards Croft's horse, and the animal shied away, sensing the coiled power in him. A man who attacks a lone woman is a coyote. Kyle said, his voice low and lethal. A scavenger who preys on the weak. "Now see here," Croft stammered, trying to regain control. "You have no authority here. I'll have the cavalry down on you from Fort Bowie before nightfall. This is an act of war." He made a fatal error. In his panic, he reached for the pistol holstered at his hip. He never had a chance. Before his fingers could even grasp the handle, Kyle moved with blinding speed. He seized Croft's wrist, twisting it with brutal efficiency. Croft cried out in pain as the bone snapped. In the same motion, Kyle yanked him from the saddle. The big rancher crashed to the ground in an undignified heap, clutching his broken arm and moaning. Two of Kyle's warriors, who had descended the hill unnoticed, were suddenly there. They hauled Croft to his feet, binding his one good arm with rawhide strips. "My arrival here has nothing to do with you," Twish Kyle said, using the Apache word for snake. "But you have placed yourself in my path." He turned his back on the captured rancher, dismissing him completely, and faced Ilara. The world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them standing in the morning light amidst the wreckage of her life. The army on the ridge, the sputtering Silas Croft. It all faded into the background. "Ilara," he said her name, and the sound of it on his lips after so long sent a shiver through her. "I came to repay a debt." A debt, she whispered, confused. "Cale, what is happening? Why are you here with all of them?" "My father, the great chief Taza, died 5 winters ago." He explained, his voice softening slightly. "I was to be his successor. But I was betrayed, ambushed by my own cousin Takoda, who wanted the leadership for himself. He struck me down and left me for the vultures. He told our people that I had been killed by soldiers. The story spilled out, filling in the 5-year gap. After Ilara had saved him, Cale had spent years in self-imposed exile, slowly gathering the warriors who remained loyal to him, and his father's memory warriors who believed Takoda was a weak and dishonorable leader. He had been slowly building his forces, waiting for the right moment to return, and challenge his cousin for control of their clan, the Chokonen band of the Chiricahua. "We have been tracking Takoda for weeks," Kyle continued. "His trail led him to this valley. My fight is with him. It is an Apache matter. But when my scouts reported a fire at the lone cabin by the creek, the cabin with the woman who mended a hawk's broken wing, my path changed. He looked meaningfully at the smouldering barn. It seems my enemy and yours share the same shadow. Ilara stared at him, her mind reeling. The sheer coincidence was staggering. The man she had saved was a betrayed chief, and his traitorous cousin had led him right back to her doorstep at the very moment she was about to lose everything. A new terrifying thought surfaced. The cavalry. Croft was right. They will come. If they see this many warriors, they will see an act of war Kyle finished for her, his face grim, which is why we must move quickly. Croft is merely the symptom. The disease runs deeper. I need to know everything. Tell me about this man, and tell me why he wants this worthless dying land so badly. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the valley. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a dawning, incredible realization. For 5 years she had been fighting her battle alone. Now, on the worst day of her life, an army had appeared on her horizon. She looked from the captured, whimpering Silas Croft to the powerful, determined face of Cale, the man whose life she had saved. She had no army. She had no allies. Until now. Taking a deep breath, she looked Cale in the eye. He doesn't want the land, she said, her voice filled with a newfound strength. He wants the water. There's a hidden spring. He knows about it. And I think your cousin Takoda does too. Kyle's reaction to the news of the spring was immediate and profound. His eyes, already sharp, narrowed into slits of intense focus. A hunter who had been tracking a single set of prints had just discovered they were leading to the lair of a much larger beast. Whispering, Ilara said, giving the spring her father's name, "He wants it to control the whole valley. I think your cousin must have discovered it and is using it as a bargaining chip." Kyle nodded slowly, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place in his mind. Takoda was always weak, always looking for an easier path than the one of honor. He would trade the secrets of our people for the white man's guns and whiskey. It makes sense. He gives this Croft the location of the spring, and in return, Croft supplies his renegade band. He strode over to Croft, who was now bound and sweating profusely under the watch of the 2 impassive warriors. Kyle grabbed a fistful of Croft's shirt, hauling him close. The snake, Takoda. Where is he? Kyle's voice was dangerously quiet. Croft, his face a mask of pain and terror, just shook his head. I don't know what you're talking about. It's a business arrangement. He provides me with information. I pay him. That's all. Where Kyle repeated, his grip tightening. He camps in the old box canyon, north of here. Croft gasped. About 5 miles past the ridge. But you'll never get to him. He's got rifles, good ones. Kyle released him in disgust, shoving him back to the ground. He turned back to Ilara, his mind clearly working. The box canyon. My scouts confirmed it is a strong defensive position. A frontal assault would be costly. A new dynamic was forming between them. No longer patient and healer, they were now allies strategists in a war with a common enemy. A strange energy crackled in the air, a fusion of his warrior's cunning and her intimate knowledge of the land she had spent her life on. There is another way, Ilara said, her voice firm. She walked to the cabin, returning moments later with her father's journal. She opened it to the hand-drawn map. My father was a surveyor. He mapped every rock and crevice of this territory. The box canyon has a main entrance which Takoda will have watched. But according to this, there is a second way in. A narrow game trail, barely a goat path that comes up the back of the canyon wall. It's steep and dangerous, but it would bring you out above his camp. Kyle studied the map intently, his finger tracing the faint line her father had drawn decades ago. He looked up at her, a new respect dawning in his eyes. This woman was more than just a kind heart. She was a fighter armed with knowledge that was as valuable as any weapon. "This changes things," he said. "We can divide our forces. A small group led by me will take this path. The larger force will create a diversion at the main entrance, making Dakota believe a full attack is coming from the front." An idea bold and reckless sparked in Alara's mind. Croft's other man, the one who burned my barn, Jedediah Kane. He's still out there. He'll ride to Wilcox and bring back the sheriff, or worse, he'll gather a posse of Croft's men. They'll come here looking for Croft. "We will be gone before they arrive," Kyle stated. "No," Alara countered. "Let them come. We can use them. Kane will lead them right to me, right to this cabin. While they're focused here, your main force can get into position at the canyon without being seen." She looked at the smoldering barn, then at her small, defensible cabin. "I can hold them off. Give you the time you need." Kyle's face hardened. "I will not hide behind a woman. This isn't about hiding," she shot back, her spirit flaring. "It's about winning. This is my land, my fight too. You know how to fight warriors, Kyle. I know how to fight men like Kane and Croft. I know this ground. Let me use that. Let me be the rock that breaks their wave, while you become the flood that sweeps through the canyon." He stared at her for a long moment, a silent battle of wills passing between them. He saw the fire in her eyes, the unyielding set of her jaw. This was not the frightened gentlewoman he remembered. This was a woman forged in the crucible of the West, as hard and resilient as the land itself. She was right. Her knowledge and her position were strategic assets. To deny her role in this fight would be to deny a powerful weapon. Very well, he conceded a hint of admiration in his voice. He issued a series of sharp commands in Apache to his warriors. The camp on the ridge stirred into organized, purposeful action. The plan was set. Kyle turned to the two warriors guarding Croft. He spoke to them, then pointed at Alara. One of the warriors, a stern-faced man with a jagged scar on his cheek, nodded and took up a position near the cabin, his rifle held ready. "His name is Chato Kyle," explained. "He will stay. He is one of my best. He will watch from the rocks above and ensure no harm comes to you. But the fight at the cabin must be yours. It must look real. It will be real," Alara assured him. Before he left to lead his assault team, Kyle came to her one last time. The urgency of the impending battle hung between them, charging the air with unspoken emotions. "5 years ago you saved my life," he said, his voice low so only she could hear. "I left you with a feather. It was not enough. You owed me nothing, Kyle," she whispered. "You are wrong," he said intensely. "In the ways of my people, a life saved is a life bound. I did not understand it then, but I understand it now. Your fight has become my fight. Your enemies, my enemies." He reached out his hand, hovering for a moment, before he gently brushed a stray piece of soot from her cheek. The brief touch was electric, a promise of a future that was, until that morning, utterly unimaginable. "Be safe, Alara Vance," he said. "You too, Kyle." He turned and swung onto his horse, his face, once again, the impassive mask of a war chief. He gave a sharp cry, and he and a small band of a dozen elite warriors broke from the main group, disappearing into the rocky terrain to follow the secret path on her father's map. Alara watched him go until he was out of sight. Then she turned her face set with grim resolve. She walked into her cabin, bolted the door, and began checking the loads in her Winchester and the old Colt revolver her father had left her. The sun was climbing higher. Jedediah Kane would be coming soon. The battle for Whispering Creek was about to begin on two fronts. The silence that followed Cale's departure was a strained, fragile thing, broken only by the nervous stomp of Dusty's hooves. Elara worked with grim efficiency, barricading the cabin window with her father's heavy oak table and preparing her weapons. Above her, hidden in a rocky alcove, the Apache warrior Chatto became a living statue, his rifle resting easily in his hands as he watched the horizon. It was noon when the dust cloud appeared, a posse of nearly 15 men, led by a furious Jedediah Kane, thundered into the yard. Sheriff Brody was among them, his face a mask of weary reluctance. "She's in there," Kane roared, his voice thick with venom. "A traitor, hiding that murdering chief. She helped him take Croft Elara." Sheriff Brody called out, holding up a hand for peace. "Come out now. Let's not have any more trouble." "The trouble is already here." "Sheriff," Elara's voice rang out from the cabin, steady and defiant. It came last night with a torch in Jedediah Kane's hand. Her words were answered by a gunshot that splintered the doorframe. The posse scattered, taking cover behind the charred timbers of the barn and the surrounding rocks. The siege had begun. Elara fought with the ferocity of a cornered lioness. She wasn't a gunslinger, but she was a homesteader who knew the value of every single bullet. She didn't waste ammunition on wild shots. Instead, she fired with unnerving precision, kicking up dust at the feet of any man who exposed himself, forcing them to stay low. Her defense was so effective that the posse's initial charge stalled into a frustrated, disorganized firefight. From his perch, Chatto's rifle cracked a single time. One of the ranch hands, who had found a clear angle on the cabin, suddenly screamed, dropping his rifle as a bullet tore through his shoulder. The shot, seemingly from nowhere, sowed confusion and fear among the attackers. Miles away at that very moment, Kyle's plan unfolded with deadly grace. He and his small band of warriors had navigated the treacherous goat path described in the journal, emerging on a high ledge overlooking Takoda's camp in the Box Canyon. Below, his cousin was distracted, barking orders as Kyle's main force created a diversion at the canyon's entrance, their war cries echoing off the rock walls. Takoda and his renegades were staring directly into a feigned attack, completely oblivious to the true threat looming above them. With a silent hand signal, Kyle launched the assault. They descended, not with a wild charge, but like shadows falling from the cliffs. The surprise was absolute. Before the renegades could even turn to face the new threat, the fight was already over. Kyle moved through the chaos with a single purpose, his eyes locked on the cousin who had betrayed him. Takoda turned his face, contorting in disbelief at the sight of the man he had left for dead. He fumbled to raise his rifle, but Kyle was a blur of motion. A thrown knife pinned Takoda's gun arm to the wooden post of a lean-to. Kyle advanced, drawing a second blade. "You have shamed our people for the last time," he said, his voice cold as stone. The duel was brutally short. Kyle, driven by righteous fury, moved with a speed and skill that Takoda's panic could not match. It ended with the traitor on his knees, disarmed and defeated, as Kyle reclaimed his title as chief. Back at the cabin, the firefight had reached a desperate peak. To hell with this, Kane bellowed, his face red with rage. "Burn her out!" He grabbed a torch from one of his men and started for the cabin. That was the final straw for Sheriff Brody. He drew his own revolver. "I said enough, Kane. This ends now. You're under arrest for the arson of this woman's barn." Kane laughed a crazed, ugly sound and turned his gun on the sheriff. "You're a fool, old man." He never fired the shot. A single sharp report echoed from the rocks above. Kane's pistol flew from a hand that had suddenly erupted in blood. He howled in agony, clutching his shattered wrist. Seeing their leader fall and the sheriff now turned against them, the last of the posse's courage evaporated. They scrambled for their horses and fled, vanishing back the way they had come. As the dust settled, Cale and his now unified band of warriors rode into the yard. They moved with the quiet confidence of victors, bringing with them the captured renegades and their leader, Takoda. They threw the still-bound Silas Croft at Sheriff Brody's feet. The entire conspiracy was laid bare. The greedy rancher, the brutal henchman, and the traitorous cousin were all brought to justice in the shadow of the home they had tried to destroy. Cale dismounted and walked to Elara, who had emerged from the cabin, her face smudged with soot but her eyes shining. The army of warriors, the captured men, the weary sheriff, it all faded away, leaving only the two of them. "The debt is paid," Cale said, his voice low and full of emotion. "We paid it," she corrected him softly. "Together." He looked at her, seeing the incredible strength he had first glimpsed 5 years ago, now forged into unbreakable steel. "This land," he declared, his voice rising for all to hear, "will forever be under the protection of the Chokonan people. The spring will be a place of peace for all to share." In the days that followed, Brody took Croft and Kane away to face justice. Cale prepared to lead his people home, but first he came to Elara's cabin one last time. "My path is with my people," he said, the unspoken reality of their different worlds hanging between them. "And mine is here," she replied, her heart aching, but her voice steady. "Rebuilding." A life together was an impossible dream, but the bond between them was a tangible thing forged in a storm, tempered by care, and now sealed in battle. It was a connection of mutual respect that ran deeper than words. "The hawk will always return to the Valley of the Dove," Cale promised his hand, finding hers. It was not a goodbye, but a vow. Elara smiled, a true, hopeful smile. "I will be here." She watched him ride away, a proud chief, taking his place in the world. She stood alone, but she was not lonely. A single act of kindness, a whisper against the fury of a storm, had echoed through time and returned to her as a song of salvation. The story of Elara Vance and Cale is a powerful reminder that our smallest choices can have the largest consequences. A single decision to show mercy, to act with compassion when fear tells you to run, can ripple through time and change the course of history, not just for one person, but for many. Theirs is a story born from the dust and grit of the American West, but its heart speaks to a timeless truth that courage isn't about the absence of fear, but about helping someone else despite it. It's a testament to the unexpected alliances and the profound connections that can be found in the most unlikely of circumstances. If this story of bravery, loyalty, and the enduring power of a single kind act moved you, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed it. Share this video with someone who loves a great story, and most importantly, subscribe and ring that notification bell. We have many more tales from history and the wild frontier to share with you, and we wouldn't want you to miss a single one. Thank you for listening.